Alright, now, Carmen had a little problem here that we're working on. And Mike down at Kinky Ride down there in Georgia is doing all that he can to kind of help me straighten this out. That's where I purchased it, and that's a good price, and he said they'd be there for me if I needed them, and that they are. I called Excalibur. I was on the phone with them for a little bit of a while, but they kind of, I believe they put me in the wrong direction. But I went and had all that checked out. They were saying that possibly the data wire on number 2 here wasn't working. I had it checked and it is working. So then what I did was, now I strip and solder all my wires. And in this case that was stripped, soldered and taped and zip tied with, with a wire tie. So I knew it was right, but I took it off and did it again. Now right now she's just wrapped and I'm using a clip on it, a jumper, kind of just to hold it to make sure, because I haven't had a chance to solder it yet. Mike from Kinky Ride is going to be calling me back, and I don't want to start getting solder irons out and things and him calling me back and me not be able to get to the phone in time. But again, the pink wire coming out of this module, the solid pink, not the striped pink, but the solid pink. Now all the other wires that were in this module, I had cut them at different lengths because they're not being used. Cut them at different lengths and then taped them all up. So this way there's no chance of any of them shorting out to one another. So each one is cut a little bit shorter than the next so that they don't short out, and then I tape them all together. And that's what I have there. So coming down out of that, there's an orange and a pink. The orange goes to number 2 on the data. The pink goes to the starter wire with the other pink wire. Alright. So, and that goes pink, pink to pink. So that's relatively simple. Alright, now the white wire under the dash, the pink with the white stripe off the alarm, goes to that one. The yellow wire off the dash has the purple wire tied onto it. Now again, you don't have to separate these wires, alright? All you have to do is strip back the insulation, give yourself enough, strip back the wire, giving yourself enough, get yourself a good wrap, give yourself enough, tightened up, and the orange wire goes to the orange under the dash. Now what you want to watch out for is this yellow wire here, because that is actually not a wire, that's a casing. There's like 5 little wires in there, so you don't want to use that one. So make sure when you pick the yellow, you want to pick not the biggest like this, the next biggest, the ones that fit the same colors, the orange, the pink, and the white, and so on. Because if you cut that, you're going to have a problem, because that goes down to this. Alright, and there's 2 wires in there, okay? So you don't want to cut that. That's not a yellow wire, that's just a casing with 2 wires in it. Alright, well, I'm sorry, right there. Okay, so anyway, now like I said before, when I do a wire, I'll draw a picture real quick so you'll have an idea again what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can find my pen, because I was just driving around and I'm sure the pen rolled all over the place and nowhere's to be found. So we'll pop the top off of this one, see if it works right. Okay, so for instance, on those big wires, here's your wire, alright, here's the wire, okay. What I do is I strip back the casing. So I cut about a 1/2 inch or better of the casing off the wire. So this is all stranded in here. Okay. Now that same piece, the casing, the strands, and the casing. Well, what I do is I stick a little screwdriver in here, a little jeweler screwdriver in there, so that now the strands are separated like this. Now, for instance, that pink wire, the little pink and the big pink had to go to that same wire. So what I did was I stripped back the large pink and I separated it into 2 parts. And I twisted them up. Then I took the small pink and I attached it to that one, and I twisted those two together. Then I took both of those, pushed them through the center here, took one side and twisted it around this way, took the other side, twisted it around this way. These are all back together because the last couple of twists, I incorporated all of it. I soldered it, making sure that the solder had flown through. You put the solder on like under the wire. You put the solder on the top of the wire. Once the wire gets hot enough, it'll pull the solder right through the wire. So you end up with a good solder. You want to make sure you got a good solder. All right. Putting solder on the top without it getting through the wire, you're not soldering the wire. Now once that was done, I start to tape it. And I tape it starting from above. Tape it all the way down and around. And then what I do is, because this was a heavier wire, and I added extra length of tape on each side, I put a zip tie here, another zip tie there, another zip tie there, to prevent the tape from coming undone. Now basically, that's what you're seeing right there. Okay? So that wire was stripped back, like I said, poked a hole through the centers, put the other two wrapped around, soldered it up, put this on, put the zip ties, and we're done. That was done with each one of these. Alright, every one of these was done the same way. So I have a good solder. Like I say, you want the solder to go through the wire. Alright, you want it to seep through. So make sure you just lay it on the top, you're not doing anything. It's gotta touch, seep through all the wires. And that's what I did there. And that's what I did with all my wiring. The smaller wires, I only use one zip tie. There's no sense using a bunch of them. Now all this menagerie of a mess that I have here, let me get rid of this here. I don't need this wire, so let me cut that off. This menagerie that I have here of wires is not going to be such a menagerie once we're done with it. Because once it works, then I am going to take each wire, coil it, or cut it, to shorten it, get that up in play, so it'll be all set. Alright guys, you're not going to believe this. See that wire right there? The one that's already shaved back? Well, the alarm. First of all, I called up Kinky Ride, and I was talking with Mike, the owner. He stayed on the phone with me for at least a half an hour trying to figure this out. Then he made calls on his end to try to figure it out. The auto start, it was cranking, but it just wouldn't start the vehicle. We increased the time on it, and we did all kinds of things. He had me programming and changing and programming and changing, and he was just sticking by me trying to get this thing to work. So when he calls me back, he starts talking about the plug down here. Now the orange wire coming out of this module goes to pin 2 on this plug. That's the data wire. So this wire here, I wish I can get some light here. My drop light is missing in action. I let somebody borrow it and then they brought it back. I just don't know where the hell they put it. And believe it or not, if it's not in where I normally put it, I'll never find it. But if you can see this wire, this black wire right here, what had happened was that wire and this wire were twisted in a pair behind this so tightly that when I was pulling on a wire to number 2, moving that little pin in there on number 2, it was moving it. Well, I was pulling on this black wire, but what happened was up inside they were twisted back to back. And they were so tight up against it because there's a back on this that you couldn't tell. So meanwhile, I'm hooked up to the wrong wire. So we're going nuts. So Mike calls me back after he made a few phone calls, and he got back to me like within 5 minutes. And he starts talking about this module, this plug, and the 2 grounds that are under there, and the orange wire. And I'm telling him, well, wait a minute, I don't have 2 grounds. I got an orange and a black. And I'm looking, and as I'm pulling down on this one, All right, trying to figure out, well, then that's number 2. Yeah, that goes right up to number 2 there, right? As I'm pulling on it, I'm feeling like a nodge up there, a nodule, and I start yanking on it, and come to find out, there it is. This wire was tucked up inside. Way up, couldn't even see it, it was buried up in the back. That's the wire I'm supposed to be hooked up to. That's why it wasn't working. So after driving Mike nuts down at Kinky Ride, down there in Georgia, and I had it hooked up to the wrong wire. Do I feel like an ass? Really? Now, it was an honest mistake because of the way that the wires were twisted up in there. But it drove me nuts, and I drove Mike nuts for over a half an hour with this. And man, so now that that's done, I have the solder iron out because I'm going to resolder this one now because we tried it and it works. I'm going to tape this up. It's only a ground, but I don't want any bare wires hanging out. If somebody works on this that doesn't know, I don't want them to see a bare wire and go, oh shit. So I'm going to tape that up. So at that point, it's done. It works. So now what I'm going to do is clean up the rest of these wires and get this up in place, and then we should be all set. But I'm telling you, when he said, when I bought the alarm from him, he says, we're going to give you everything you need to get it done as simply as possible, and it's going to be painless. Well, painless maybe not because of my age and my bad back, but other than that, it was simple once I decided to follow his rule, his paperwork, and not follow everything that was in the book, because out of all the wires that were in there, I think I only needed like 5 or 6 of them, and then maybe another, we got 4 or so going to the ignition, which I did a video on. So this is a follow-up video on how someone can make a mistake. And I must have taken a stupid pill that day, or a big dummy pill. That's what it was. Now I do have an excuse, because it was pouring rain that day, if you remember, and I had a tarp hanging over me, which was kind of shading everything. And I don't have my drop light, as you can see, because somebody borrowed it and put it back in the wrong place. So even though I did screw up, I've got a good excuse for it. So anyway, I told Mike I'm going to have to move to Georgia when we move, just because of his help, and buy him dinner on top of it. Right, I'm telling you. All right, what he went through to help get me straight, you know, and then come to find out it had nothing to do with anything other than stupidity or failure to notice something on my part. All right, and once he had gotten me to that area talking about 2 ground wires, and I only got 1, that started me probing and looking and feeling and really getting into this more so. And I got the flashlight out and everything. I said, check this shit out. Alright? How stupid. Alright? Anyway, it runs, it starts, the alarm works, everything's fine. Now I can work on this and I can hook up the camera. So when the alarm goes off, the camera will start recording. And I just found my drop light. I needed something that was in the toolbox in the back of the van. I have a large toolbox back there, and it has a lower section that you have to lift it out. Well, when the friend of mine that borrowed my drop light that came out of the garage, when he returned it, I was here. And he says, oh, I returned your light. I said, well, okay, because I was doing something at the time. He put it in the toolbox in the back of my van. Now, if I didn't have to go into my toolbox just now, I would have never found the light. So it's coming in handy now when it should have been in before. So anyway, as you can see, the wire is all connected, it's soldered, it's taped, and it's tied using the zip ties, the wire ties. And I did it with the other wire, even though there's nothing connected to it. I just wanted to make sure, even though it's a ground, that there was no bareness. So I did the same thing with that. I just made sure that there was no little stragglies hanging out that were going to poke through the tape. I put a little solder on it just to make sure that it was together, and then I taped it and tied it. So now I'm going to start working on this little menagerie to neaten this all up, and then I'll give you a peek when I'm done. I actually forgot to record the problem, and I just showed afterwards. I had a problem with this thing starting. It didn't want to start. It would turn over and no start. Mike told me all the programming procedures to go through to lengthen the crank, the turnover time. We did that, and it still didn't want to start. So at that point, we kept leaning that wire, the orange wire that goes to the number 2 on the plug underneath the dash. And I know this solder wire, the wire's connected, it's tight, it's soldered. There's nothing wrong with it, So Mike wanted to call me back, and he wanted to check on a few things. So he checks and he calls me back, and he starts talking about the 2 ground wires on the back of that plug right there underneath the dash. He said there's a couple of browns, there's a black rather, grounds. I said, well, I see 1 ground wire, I says, and an orange wire. I says, but coming off number 2, there's 2 wires. All right, I says, at that point, there's 2 wires there. Well, he said, well, as long as they're both connected to the pin, it doesn't make a difference, which is true. Well, however, that wasn't the case. Once I realized, as Mike did the calling to where he called and called me back, he's starting to explain to me what's going on, and we had a problem with the phone, so he couldn't hear me. I can hear him, but he couldn't hear me. And he's rattling on, telling me about these 2 black wires that, could be a problem, and he's going on and on and on, and I'm really not listening to him because I'm trying to tell him, I found the problem, I found the problem, I found the problem. But he's not hearing me because of a phone problem. So, at that point I said, Mike, shut up, I found the problem, but he's not hearing me. Make a long story short, while he's talking about those supposedly 2 black wires, which I didn't see 2 black wires, I realized that the 2 wires that I had that I thought was coming off number 2, a black and a purple, when in fact the black one wasn't connected to number 2, and I was connected my orange wire to the black wire by mistake when it was supposed to have gone to the purple wire that was strung up behind. So you didn't even see the purple wire. All you seen was a black wire that appeared to be coming off the back of number 2. When in return, it was coming off the back of number 4. The way they had it twisted under there was, let me see if I can draw it real quick here on paper so you can see it. All right. I can't see it, so I don't know how you're going to see it. On the back of the plug, looking down on it, you had the wires, the black wires, the orange wire, and the purple wire. This was the one, number 2, that I was supposed to connect to. Well, what had happened was number 2 ended up coming up behind everything, so you didn't see it. You didn't see this purple wire, and the black wire was tucked in behind it like that. So when I took what I was thinking was number 2 wire, it was actually the black wire that was connected over here to number 4. So as I'm pulling on it, naturally it's moving the plug inside. So it's the right one, so it appeared to be the right one. So that's the one I connected to. Well, when Mike was talking to me about the 2 black wires, I'm under there. I'm trying to find the second black wire, and I'm starting to yank things down and feel things. And then I started feeling this little cluster over here. And I said, what's that? And I'm trying to get up under there, and I'm pulling it down, pulling it down, pulling it down. Then I realized that this black wire here was over there and tucked behind this wire, which was up out of sight. As soon as I moved that black wire down, the purple wire fell down, and that's the one I was supposed to be connected to. So it was just a big mistake on my part. I think I took one of those, what do you call them, big dummy pills that day. So, but in reality, and in defense of myself, it was raining like hell that day. I was doing it outside, so I had a tarp from going from the roof of the van over the door, so it was a blue tarp, which made it dark in there. I'm using a flashlight because I couldn't find the drop light. So I can write a book on excuses as to why I made that mistake. But once I did that, and we reprogrammed it. Mike went through the programming with it again for me, on the AutoLink, and boom, she started right up. So if it wasn't for Mike calling me back to talk to me about these 2 wires, black wires coming off the back, I would have never found this, because it appeared to only be 1 black, 1 orange, and this other one over here in the corner that was very dark in color, meaning black, but up underneath, me with my bifocals and bad back, I couldn't get up under there. It looked dark to me. Dark is dark, I couldn't tell if it was purple or black. But once the other one came down, I realized it. So it's just a little bit of ignorance, basically, and being in a hurry and not having enough light. And thanks to Mike, in a half hour of his time trying to go through all kinds of programming first, and his patience, that we actually came across it, and I was able to find it. So, but the alarm's working fine now. I have no problems with it. Mike, thank you.